The freezing water of the Snake River didn't just wash away the blood, it washed away the scent of royalty. When Tessa dragged that massive, broken body onto the muddy bank, she didn't see a king. She didn't see the monster who ruled the continent with an iron fist. She only saw something that looked as broken and discarded as she was. But in the world of wolves, kindness is a fatal flaw, and by the time the snow melts, Tessa will realize that saving a life might just cost her everything she has left. This isn't a fairy tale. This is how the Alpha King was found, and how an exile became a target. The winter in Montana was not a season. It was a verdict. It judged the weak, buried the slow, and preserved the dead. Tessa O'Malley knew this better than anyone. She had been living in the skeletal remains of her grandfather's logging cabin for 3 years, ever since the Ironwood Pack had formally severed her bond. A rejected Omega, that was the title stamped on her file at the registry. It sounded bureaucratic, almost clinical, but the reality was a jagged scar on her soul that throbbed every time the temperature dropped below 0. She adjusted the strap of her rifle, her breath pluming in the gray morning air. The thermometer on the porch had read 10 degrees below freezing. Her boots crunched heavily on the frost-hardened mud as she made her way toward the riverbank to check the beaver traps. She didn't like killing, but hunger was a persuasive debater. The Snake River was running high and black, churning with chunks of ice that looked like broken teeth. Tessa stopped. Ideally, she should have been looking for the bobbing marker of a trap. Instead, her eyes locked onto a dark, hulking mass caught in the tangle of a fallen hemlock tree about 20 feet from the shore. It wasn't a log. It was fur. "Bear?" she whispered, unslinging the rifle. No. The current shifted the mass, rolling it slightly. A paw broke the surface. It was massive, the size of a dinner plate, but the anatomy was wrong for a bear. It was canine. A wolf. A gigantic, charcoal black wolf, easily the size of a small pony. Tessa's heart hammered against her ribs. Rogue wolves didn't come this far north, not the feral ones anyway. And shifters? Shifters stayed in the cities or the pack territories. They didn't float face down in a freezing river in the middle of nowhere unless they were dead. She should turn around. She should walk back to the cabin, lock the door, and let nature finish what it started. If this was a shifter, they were trouble. If it was a pack wolf, finding him might bring his kin. And if the Ironwood wolves found her here, you're garbage, Tessa. A defect. If I see your face again, I'll tear it off. The voice of Gareth, her intended mate, and the Beta's son echoed in her memory. She looked back at the water. The wolf whined. It was a sound so faint, it was almost swallowed by the rushing water, but it was there. A sound of pure, desperate agony. Damn it, Tessa cursed. She dropped her rifle on the dry bank and slid down the muddy embankment. The water hit her thighs like a sledgehammer of ice. She gasped, her muscles seizing, but she waded forward. The current fought her, trying to sweep her legs out from under her. But Tessa was no longer the soft girl who cried in the pack house kitchens. She was muscle and spite. She reached the hemlock tree and grabbed the wolf's scruff. The fur was slick with something thicker than water. Blood. So much blood. "Come on, big guy," she grunted, digging her boots into the riverbed. "Work with me." The wolf was dead weight. 400 pounds. Easy. Tessa screamed with effort, the tendons in her neck straining as she hauled him over the submerged branches. The water turned pink around them. It took 20 minutes to drag him 10 yards. By the time she collapsed on the rocky shore, her legs were numb and her lungs were burning. She rolled onto her back, staring at the gray sky, gasping. Beside her, the wolf let out a wet, rattling breath. Tessa sat up, shivering violently. She looked at the beast. Now that he was out of the water, the damage was horrific. A gash ran from his shoulder to his hip, deep enough to expose the glistening red muscle beneath. But it wasn't just a cut. The edges of the wound were black and bubbling. "Silver," she whispered. Only weaponized silver nitrate caused burns like that. This wasn't an accident. This was an execution attempt. She looked at his face. Even snarled in pain, the wolf was magnificent, pitch black, with a bone structure that looked carved from obsidian. "I can't carry you," she told the unconscious wolf. "And if you shift back to human now, you'll die of hypothermia in 5 minutes." She had to improvise. Tessa ran back to the tree line where she kept an emergency cache. She grabbed the heavy-duty plastic tarp she used for dragging firewood. Returning to the wolf, she managed to roll his limp body onto the tarp. She tied the grommets with paracord, creating a makeshift sled. Throwing the rope over her shoulder, she began the agonizing trek up the hill toward the cabin. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and drying herbs, sage, dried nettle, and the sharp scent of antiseptic. Tessa had managed to get the wolf onto the rug in front of the cast iron stove. It had taken every ounce of strength she possessed. She had stoked the fire until the iron belly of the stove glowed cherry red. She stripped off her wet clothes, changing rapidly into dry flannel and wool before kneeling beside the beast. He was still in wolf form, which was good. The fur provided insulation, but the silver was eating him alive. "I need to clean this," she said aloud. The silence of the cabin usually comforted her. Today, it felt heavy. She retrieved her medical kit. It wasn't a standard first aid box. It was a trauma kit she'd bought off a disgraced field medic named Doc Lewis in the back of a hardware store in Billings. It had scalpels, forceps, and, crucially, a chelating agent for silver poisoning. Tessa put on latex gloves. "This is going to hurt." She poured the saline solution over the massive wound. The wolf thrashed. A low, thunderous growl vibrated through the floorboards. His eyes snapped open. They were gold. Not the yellow gold of a common wolf, but the color of molten bullion. They were ancient, terrifying eyes. He tried to snap at her, his jaws clamping on empty air inches from her face. "Hey!" Tessa barked, slamming her hand on the floor. "I'm the one with the needle. You want to die? Keep moving. You want to live? Submit." It was an Omega command. It shouldn't have worked. Omegas had no authority. Their voices were designed to soothe, not command. But there was steel in Tessa's tone born of 3 years of solitude. The wolf froze. Those gold eyes locked onto hers, confused, hazy with pain, but calculating. He slumped back down, a huff of air leaving his nostrils. "Good boy," she murmured, her voice softening. She worked for hours. She had to cut away the necrotic tissue, the flesh burned black by the silver. It was gruesome work. She stitched the muscle layers first, then the skin, her hands steady despite the exhaustion trembling in her legs. When she finally tied off the last suture, she washed the blood from her hands in a basin. The water turned dark crimson instantly. She sat back against the leg of her armchair, watching him. He was breathing steadily now, the heat of the fire drying his fur. "Who are you?" she whispered. "And who wants you dead this badly?" As if in answer, the air in the room shifted. It became heavy, charged with static electricity. The hairs on Tessa's arms stood up. The snapping of bones echoed in the small room. He was shifting. Tessa scrambled back. Shifting, while injured, was dangerous. It could tear stitches. It could kill the heart. But he was too strong to stop. The black fur receded, the muzzle shortened, the paws elongated into hands. In moments, the giant wolf was gone. In his place lay a man. Tessa stared, her breath catching in her throat. He was naked, sprawling on the rug. He was huge, well over 6 feet, with cords of muscle that looked like they were carved from marble. His hair was the same ink black as his fur, wet and matted against his forehead. His face was sharp, aristocratic, with a jawline that could cut glass. But it was the tattoo on his chest that made Tessa's blood run cold. It was a complex geometric design, ink scarred into the skin over his heart. A circle enclosing a crown of thorns and a double-headed wolf. Tessa knew that sigil. Every wolf in the Northern Hemisphere knew that sigil. It was stamped on the decrees that taxed the packs. It was on the flags that flew over the capital. It was the royal crest of House Valerius. This wasn't just a soldier. This wasn't a rogue. The man groaned, his eyelids fluttering. Tessa covered her mouth to stifle a gasp. She recognized him now from the grainy news broadcasts she watched on the TV at the gas station in town. It was Kieran Vane, the Alpha King, the Butcher of the North. She had just saved the life of the most dangerous predator on Earth. And if the rumors were true, he didn't leave witnesses. Tessa didn't sleep that night. She sat in the armchair, her shotgun across her lap, watching the king breathe. She should leave. She should pack her truck and drive until the gas ran out. But the blizzard had finally broken over the mountain, sealing the pass. The snow was piling up against the windows, a white curtain closing off the world. They were trapped. Around 3 a.m., Kieran stirred. "Water," he rasped. His voice was a wreck, deep, gravelly, and commanding, even in weakness. Tessa stood up, putting the shotgun aside, but keeping a hunting knife in her belt. She filled a tin cup from the bucket and knelt beside him, lifting his head. He drank greedily, water spilling down his chin and chest. When he finished, his eyes opened fully. Those gold eyes were lucid now. They scanned the room, the rough-hewn logs, the drying herbs, the cheap furniture before landing on her. He looked at her faded flannel shirt, her messy bun, the scar on her chin. He inhaled, testing her scent. "Omega," he stated. It wasn't a question. It was a categorization. "Tessa," she corrected him, pulling back. "And you're welcome." Kieran tried to sit up, but the pain in his flank floored him. He gritted his teeth, a hiss of air escaping him. He looked down at the bandage wrapping his torso. "You stitched me?" "I did. And I removed the silver nitrate. You had about an hour left before it stopped your heart." Kieran looked at her again, this time with a focused intensity that made her want to run. "You know who I am." "I know you're heavy," Tessa deflected, standing up to put distance between them. "And I know you have a tattoo that says you're trouble." "Trouble." Kieran let out a dry, humorless laugh. "That's one word for it." He slumped back against the pillows she had arranged. "Where are we?" "Bitterroot Mountains. Sector 4. Off the grid." "Good." He closed his eyes. "If anyone comes, if you hear an engine, or a howl." "Yes? Kill me," Kieran said. His voice was devoid of emotion. "Do not let them take me alive." Tessa stared at him. "I just spent 4 hours sewing you back together. I'm not undoing my work." Kieran's eyes snapped open, flashing with alpha dominance. "This is not a request, Omega. My enemies. What they will do to me, and what they will do to you for harboring me, is worse than death." "I'm not afraid of pain," Tessa said quietly. "I've had my fill of it." "You have no idea," Kieran muttered. He looked at the ceiling, his jaw clenching. "Who did this? Who rejected you?" Tessa stiffened. "That's none of your business. You have no pack scent," Kieran analyzed her like he was reading a report. "You live in squalor. You have trauma in your eyes. Someone threw you away." "Who?" "Sleep, Your Majesty," Tessa said, the title dripping with sarcasm. "You need the rest." She turned to walk to the kitchen area. "Wait." She stopped. "My leg," Kieran said. "There's something in my boot. A drive." Tessa looked at the pile of wet clothes she had cut off him. His heavy combat boots were drying by the door. She walked over and picked up the left boot. Inside, tucked into a hidden lining, was a small, titanium-encased flash drive. "Is this why they tried to kill you?" she asked, holding it up. That, Kieran said, his voice fading as exhaustion took him again, "is the names of the traitors. Keep it safe. If I die, get it to General Voss in the capital. Trust no one else." "General Voss," Tessa repeated. Great. I'll just hop on a bus. But Kieran was already out. Tessa held the cold metal drive in her hand. She looked at the man on the floor, the king. He was vulnerable, mortal, and relying on her, a rejected nobody. A sudden howl cut through the night air outside. It wasn't a wolf howl. It was mechanical, a siren. Tessa rushed to the window and wiped away the condensation. Far down the mountain road, through the swirling snow, she saw lights, blue and red strobes reflecting off the ice. They weren't the police. The local sheriff drove a beat-up Bronco with a yellow bar. These were black SUVs with tactical lights. They found you, Tessa whispered. She looked at the unconscious king, then at the rifle on the wall. She looked at the flash drive. She blew out the oil lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness. Welcome to my house, she whispered to the approaching lights. She racked the slide of her shotgun. Hope you brought body bags. The headlights cut through the darkness of the cabin, sweeping across the rough-hewn logs like prison searchlights. Tessa stood by the window, the shotgun heavy and cold in her hands. Her heart wasn't beating, it was vibrating. She had hidden Kieran in the root cellar. It was a small, damp hollow beneath the kitchen floorboards, covered by a heavy rug and a cast-iron table. It smelled of potatoes and earth, a scent that might mask the copper tang of his royal blood, but not for long. Not from a trained tracker. The engine noise died. Car doors slammed. Heavy boots crunched on the snow. There were 3 of them. Tessa moved to the door. She didn't wait for them to knock. She threw it open, leveling the shotgun at the chest of the lead figure standing on her porch. Private property, Tessa said, her voice steady. Turn around. The man in front didn't flinch. He was tall, wearing a black tactical coat that cost more than Tessa's entire life earnings. His face was a map of sharp angles and indifference, his eyes pale gray. He wasn't a wolf. The scent was wrong. He smelled of gun oil, mint, and cold electricity, a human mercenary. But the 2 men behind him, they radiated the musk of aggressive, agitated shifters. Miss O'Malley, the man said. He raised his hands, palms open, showing black leather gloves. I'm Commander Riker. We're looking for a fugitive. Dangerous animal. Rabid. I haven't seen any animals except the ones I skin, Tessa lied. Get off my porch. Riker smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We tracked a blood trail to the riverbank. And then, drag marks, leading right here. He took a step forward. Put the gun down, Tessa. Or my associates will tear this cabin apart with you inside it. Tessa hesitated, then lowered the barrel slightly. She couldn't fight 3 of them. Not like this. She had to play the scared Omega. She had to buy time. I found a deer, she stammered, letting her shoulders slump. It was wounded. I dragged it up for meat. It's in the shed out back. Riker's eyes narrowed. He sniffed the air. A deer. You dragged a 300-pound buck up a snowy embankment by yourself? Hunger makes you strong. Riker pushed past her, entering the cabin. The 2 shifters followed, their eyes glowing faint amber in the gloom. They began tossing the room, overturning the armchair, sweeping jars off the shelves. Hey! Tessa shouted, backing up against the kitchen table, standing directly over the trapdoor. You have no right! Riker ignored her. He walked to the wood stove. He looked at the blood-stained basin Tessa hadn't had time to empty. He dipped a gloved finger into it and held it up to the light. That's not deer blood, Riker said softly. Too dark. And I smell. Antiseptic. He turned to her, his face hardening. Where is he? And I cut myself chopping wood, Tessa said, clutching her hand. Riker moved with a speed that was impossible for a human. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully, inspecting her hands. They were calloused, scarred, but whole. Liar, he hissed. He shoved her backward. Tessa hit the counter hard, the breath leaving her lungs. One of the shifter henchmen, a brute with a shaved head, sniffed the air near the heavy oak table. He growled, pointing down. Beneath, Commander. I smell Alpha." Tessa's stomach dropped. Riker drew a sleek, silenced pistol from his coat. "Move the table." The henchman shoved the heavy iron table aside with a screech of metal on wood. They kicked the rug away, revealing the hatch. "Open it," Riker commanded Tessa. Tessa stared at the gun. She stared at the hatch. If she opened it, they would execute Kieran. If she didn't, they would kill her, then execute Kieran. She reached for the iron ring of the trapdoor. As she bent down, her hand brushed the hidden catch of the flour bin built into the bottom of the counter. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She yanked the trapdoor open. In the darkness below, 2 golden eyes flashed. But before Riker could fire, Tessa kicked the lever on the cabinet. A pressurized cloud of white flour blasted into the room, creating an instant, blinding fog. "Fire!" Riker shouted, coughing. Tessa didn't hesitate. She grabbed the flare gun she kept by the stove for emergencies and fired blindly into the white cloud. The flour dust ignited. Boom. The explosion blew out the windows and threw the 2 henchmen against the far wall. The air turned into a fireball. "Get up!" Tessa screamed, jumping into the root cellar. The fire was raging above them, eating the oxygen. Kieran was awake, adrenaline overriding his injuries. He looked at her, his face illuminated by the burning ceiling above. "You are insane," he rasped, awe in his voice. "Move." There was a secondary exit in the cellar, a storm drain that led out to the creek bed. It was tight, frozen, and filled with spiders, but it was the only way out. Tessa shoved Kieran toward the tunnel. He groaned, clutching his side, but he moved. He was the king. He didn't wait to be rescued twice. He crawled, his massive shoulders scraping the dirt walls. They emerged into the freezing night air 50 yards behind the cabin. The structure was now a torch, flames licking up into the snowy sky. Riker and his men were stumbling out the front door, coughing, their clothes smoking. "Run," Tessa commanded. She hooked her arm under Kieran's good shoulder. Together, they stumbled into the deep tree line, the blizzard swallowing them whole. They walked for 3 hours. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a cold so deep it felt like it was cracking their bones. The blizzard had intensified, becoming a whiteout. Visibility was 0. Kieran was failing. He was leaning heavily on Tessa, his breathing ragged and wet. The stitches held, but the exertion was tearing him apart. "Stop!" he gasped, his legs buckling. He sank into a snowdrift beneath a massive spruce tree. "Leave me. You can make it." Tessa stood over him, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. "Shut up. I didn't blow up my house just to let you freeze to death in a ditch." "Why?" Kieran looked up at her, snow catching in his dark lashes. "I am nothing to you, a stranger. You're a life," Tessa said fiercely. "And I'm tired of watching things die." She looked around. They needed shelter. The wind chill was approaching -20. Even a shifter's metabolism couldn't fight this forever, not with significant blood loss. "There," she pointed. About 100 yards up the slope, a rock formation jutted out like a jagged jaw. It was a small cave, barely a crevice, but it was out of the wind. "One last push," she ordered. Getting him up the slope was torture. Tessa slipped twice, bruising her knees on hidden rocks, but she didn't let go of his arm. When they finally collapsed inside the small cave, it felt like a palace. It was dry. The floor covered in old pine needles. Tessa didn't rest. She gathered dead branches from the entrance, building a small, concealed fire at the back of the cave. She used the last of her lighter fluid. The flame flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. Kieran lay against the rock wall, his face gray. He was shivering violently, the dangerous kind of shivering that precedes organ failure. "You're hypothermic," Tessa said, stripping off her wet outer coat. "The fire isn't enough." Kieran's eyes were half closed. Don't touch me. I am dangerous. You're a popsicle, Tessa snapped. And I'm not asking for permission. She moved to him. We have to share body heat. It's the only way. She unzipped his ruined jacket and pulled it off. His skin was ice cold to the touch. The bandages were soaked through with fresh blood, but the bleeding had slowed. Tessa hesitated only for a second. She lay down beside him on the pine needles, pulling her own dry flannel coat over both of them. She pressed her body against his back, wrapping her arms around his chest, avoiding his wound. This is treason, Kieran mumbled, though he leaned into her warmth instinctively. Touching the king. Sue me, Tessa whispered against his shoulder. For a long time, the only sound was the howling wind outside and the crackle of the small fire. Slowly, the shivering stopped. Kieran's breathing deepened. His body temperature began to rise, his shifter heat radiating back into her. It was intimate in a way Tessa hadn't expected. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her arm. She could smell him beneath the blood and smoke. He smelled like cedar and rain. It was an intoxicating, powerful scent. Who rejected you? The question was soft, spoken into the darkness. Tessa stiffened. Go to sleep. I can feel your pain, Kieran said. It's old, but it's deep. A wolf doesn't live alone in a shack unless they were forced to. Tessa was silent for a long time. Then, maybe because it was dark, or maybe because they might die anyway, she spoke. Gareth Ironwood, she said. The Beta's son of the Ironwood pack. Kieran's body tensed. Ironwood. They are ambitious. I was his fated mate, Tessa said, her voice hollow. Or I was supposed to be. But when I presented, I was an Omega. And not just an Omega, a runt. My wolf was small, quiet. Gareth wanted a warrior. A Luna who could fight. She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. He rejected me in front of the whole pack. He called me a genetic dead end. He broke the bond. The pain. It almost killed me. My father was ashamed. He gave me the cabin and told me to disappear. Kieran remained silent, but his hand moved, covering hers where it rested on his chest. His grip was firm. Ironwood is a fool, Kieran rumbled, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating through her chest. Strength is not just fangs and claws, Tessa. Strength is dragging a 400-pound stranger out of a frozen river. Strength is looking a killer in the eye and blowing up your own home. He turned his head slightly, his gold eyes catching the firelight. If Gareth Ironwood saw you today, Kieran said, he would fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness. Tessa's breath hitched. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not her father. Not her pack. You're just saying that because I'm your heater, she deflected, trying to pull away. Kieran tightened his grip on her hand, keeping her close. I am the king. I do not lie, and I do not flatter. The tension in the cave shifted. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was recognition. The Alpha King was acknowledging the rejected Omega. Tessa felt a flush of heat that had nothing to do with the fire. Rest. We have to move at dawn. Kieran closed his eyes, but he didn't let go of her hand. When we get back to the capital, I will deal with Ironwood. Let's just worry about not dying tomorrow, Tessa whispered. But as sleep took them, Tessa felt a strange sensation in her chest, the hollow ache that Gareth had left behind. It felt a little less empty. The morning sun didn't bring warmth, but it brought clarity. The sky was a piercing, brutal blue. Tessa woke up alone. Panic surged through her. She sat up, reaching for her shotgun, but it was gone. Relax. She spun around. Kieran was standing at the mouth of the cave. He was dressed in his dried clothes, her shotgun resting easily on his shoulder. He looked better. Miraculously better. The shifter healing ability was terrifying. His color had returned, the gray pallor replaced by a healthy, rugged flush. He moved with a predator's grace, though she noticed a slight hitch in his step on his left side. "You're up," Tessa said, smoothing her hair. She felt exposed without the darkness of the cave. "I scouted the perimeter," Kieran said. He walked over and handed her the shotgun. "Riker is thorough. They have drones up. Thermal imaging." "Great," Tessa muttered, checking the chamber. "So we're sitting ducks." "No, we're wolves," Kieran corrected. "We hunt." He pulled the flash drive from his pocket. "I need a computer and a secure line. The nearest town is Black Hollow." Tessa's eyes widened. Black Hollow? That's a ghost town. The mines closed 10 years ago. "Exactly," Kieran said. "There's an old emergency broadcast station there. It runs on a separate grid. Solar. If I can patch into the transmitter, I can send the data to Voss." "It's 20 miles through deep snow," Tessa argued. "Then we better start walking." The trek was grueling, but Kieran took the lead this time. He broke the trail, his massive boots carving a path through the drifts. He stopped every hour to let Tessa rest, scanning the horizon with those unnatural golden eyes. By noon, they reached the edge of the forest. Below them, nestled in a valley, lay Black Hollow. It was a skeletal ruin of a town. Collapsed roofs, rusted machinery, and silence. "It looks dead," Tessa whispered. "Let's hope so," Kieran said. They moved down into the town, sticking to the shadows of the dilapidated buildings. They reached the old radio tower at the center of town. The building at its base was brick, sturdy, with barred windows. Kieran kicked the door in. The lock snapped like a twig. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of light. Old consoles from the 90S lined the walls. "Does any of this work?" Tessa asked, skeptical. Kieran moved to a breaker panel. "The military maintains these as backups for nuclear scenarios. They're dormant, not dead." He flipped a series of switches. Somewhere in the basement, a generator coughed, sputtered, and then hummed to life. Lights flickered on the console. "Yes," Kieran hissed. He sat down at the main desk, plugging the flash drive into a port. His fingers flew across the keyboard. "I'm uploading the encryption key now. Once Voss gets this, he can mobilize the Royal Guard." "And then what?" Tessa asked, watching the progress bar on the green screen. "We just wait for a chopper? Then I take back my throne," Kieran said grimly, "and I execute the traitors." "Who are they?" Tessa asked, stepping closer. "Who betrayed you?" Kieran hesitated. He looked at the screen. The file list was populating. "My uncle," he said, his voice low. "Duke Roderick. He wants to return to the old ways. War with the humans. Expansion." Tessa shivered. Roderick was known for his cruelty. If he took the throne, the peace treaties would burn. "And," Kieran continued, his eyes narrowing as he read a new file that popped up, "he has financiers. Pacts that are funding the coup in exchange for territory." He froze. "What?" Tessa asked. Kieran turned to her slowly. "The Ironwood Pack." Tessa felt the blood drain from her face. "My pack?" "They provided the silver nitrate," Kieran said, reading from the screen. "Your Alpha and his son Gareth. They are the ones who set the trap at the river. They are Roderick's right hand." Tessa leaned against the dusty desk for support. "Gareth? Tried to kill you?" "Yes." Kieran stood up, his face a mask of fury. "Which means Riker isn't just a mercenary. He's on Ironwood's payroll, and he knows exactly who you are." Crash. The window behind them shattered. A canister rolled across the floor, hissing. "Gas!" Kieran shouted. He tackled Tessa, covering her body with his as the room filled with acrid yellow smoke. It wasn't tear gas. It was wolfsbane. Tessa coughed, her throat closing up instantly. Kieran roared, but his strength was sapped by the poison. The door burst open. Figures in gas masks stormed in. Not 3 this time, a dozen. Kieran tried to rise, his claws extending, but a taser dart hit him in the neck, then another. He convulsed, crashing to the floor. Tessa scrambled for her shotgun, but a boot stomped on her hand. She cried out. She looked up. The figure standing over her removed his gas mask. It wasn't Riker. It was a man with handsome features, blonde hair, and cruel blue eyes. A man she had loved once. "Hello, Tessa." Gareth Ironwood smiled down at her. "Look at you, still picking up stray dogs." He looked at the unconscious king, then back at her. "You really are a magnet for failure, aren't you?" Gareth sneered. "Grab them. The Duke wants the king alive for the ceremony. And the girl." He grabbed Tessa by the jaw, forcing her to look at him. "The girl is coming home. We have unfinished business." Tessa spat in his face. Gareth wiped it away calmly, then backhanded her. The world went black. The smell of damp stone and rusting iron was the first thing Tessa registered. It was a smell she knew well, the scent of the ironwood packs holding cells. It was the scent of hopelessness. She opened her eyes. She was in a small, windowless cell carved into the bedrock beneath the main packhouse. Her wrists were bound with silver-threaded rope, burning slightly against her skin, though as a latent wolf, the effect wasn't as debilitating as it would be for an alpha. Awake, finally. Tessa looked up. Gareth was sitting on a wooden stool outside the bars, whittling a piece of wood with a hunting knife. He looked calm, almost bored. "Where is he?" Tessa demanded, her voice raspy. "The king?" Gareth blew the shavings off the wood. "He's being prepared. Uncle Roderick has a flair for the dramatic. He wants the execution to be at moonrise. Something about cleansing the bloodline." He stood up and walked to the bars. "But we have a few hours, Tessa. Time to catch up." "I have nothing to say to you," Tessa spat. "You betrayed your king. You're a traitor." "I'm a realist," Gareth snapped, his calm facade cracking. "Do you know what Kieran Vane did to the economy? The restrictions on territory? The bans on expansion? He's making us weak." Roderick. Roderick understands that wolves are meant to rule, not coexist. "So you kill him?" Tessa shook her head. "You're pathetic, Gareth. You were pathetic when you rejected me, and you're pathetic now." Gareth unlocked the cell door. He stepped inside, the small space suddenly feeling suffocating. He grabbed Tessa by the hair, yanking her head back. "I rejected you," he hissed into her ear, "because you are broken. A wolf with no voice, a woman with no power. Do you think I wanted to be tied to a genetic failure? I did you a favor. I let you live." "You let me starve," Tessa corrected him, staring into his cruel blue eyes without blinking. "There's a difference." And yet, Gareth mused, trailing a finger down her jaw. "Here you are, smelling like him. Like the king. Did you sleep with him, Tessa? Did you spread your legs for royalty, hoping it would fix you?" Tessa headbutted him. It was a savage, desperate move. Her forehead connected with his nose with a sickening crunch. Gareth stumbled back, blood spurting onto his shirt. He roared, his face contorting into a half-shift, claws elongated from his fingers. He backhanded her, sending her crashing into the stone wall. "You bitch!" Gareth screamed. He raised his hand to strike again, to shred her. Ro-ar. The sound didn't come from Gareth. It came from the very foundations of the building. It was a howl so deep, so full of ancient tectonic rage, that dust fell from the ceiling. Gareth froze. His wolf whimpered instinctively. That was an alpha command. But not just any alpha. That was a primordial command. "He sensed it," Tessa whispered, wiping blood from her lip. She started to laugh. "He felt you hit me." Gareth looked at the ceiling, fear flickering in his eyes. "That's impossible. He's in the silverskin cage. He can't sense anything." "He's the king," Tessa smiled, her teeth red. "And you just made a very big mistake. 3 levels up. In the grand atrium of the pack house, chaos was erupting. Kieran was indeed inside the silverskin cage, a transparent box made of reinforced glass laced with silver filaments, designed to neutralize a shifter's connection to their wolf. He was stripped to the waist, his healing wounds on display, chained to the floor. Duke Roderick, a silver-haired man with a face like a hawk, was pacing in front of the assembled pack elders. "The usurper falls tonight," Roderick was shouting, "and the Ironwood pack will be the first to—" Then came the roar. Kieran's head snapped up, his golden eyes, which had been dim, suddenly ignited with a violet flame. Tessa. He felt her pain. He felt the blow she had taken, and something inside him, the restraints, the silver, the poison, it all shattered under the weight of his fury. The geometric tattoo on his chest began to glow. "What is happening?" Roderick shouted, backing away. "Sedate him!" 2 guards rushed the cage with syringes. Kieran stood up. The chains anchoring him to the floor pulled taut. The metal groaned. The concrete floor cracked. "Gareth touched her," Kieran said. His voice wasn't human. It was a dual-tone vibration, man and beast speaking in unison. With emotion that defied physics, Kieran jerked his arms upward. The steel chains didn't just break, they disintegrated, snapping like thread. "Impossible," Roderick whispered. Kieran turned to the glass wall of the cage. He didn't punch it. He placed his palm against it and pushed. The silver filaments sparked and exploded. The glass shattered outward in a shower of deadly diamonds. The guards were thrown back by the shockwave. Kieran stepped out of the cage, glass crunching under his bare feet. He looked at Roderick. "You wanted a show, Uncle," Kieran snarled. "You got one." "Kill him!" Roderick shrieked. "Kill him now!" 30 wolves, the elite guard of the Ironwood pack, shifted instantly. A tide of fur and fangs surged toward the king. Kieran didn't shift. He didn't need to. He moved like a blur of violence. He caught the first wolf in midair, slamming it into the marble floor with enough force to crack the foundation. He spun, kicking a second wolf through a heavy oak door. He was a whirlwind of death, but he wasn't staying to fight. He was heading for the stairs. He was going to the dungeon. Back in the cell, Gareth was panicking. The sounds of screaming and breaking furniture were filtering down from above. "What did you do?" he yelled at Tessa. "I didn't do anything," Tessa said, struggling to her feet. "I told you. You woke him up." The heavy steel door to the dungeon level flew off its hinges. It sailed across the room and embedded itself in the far wall. Kieran stood in the doorway. He was covered in blood, none of it his own. His chest was heaving. His violet gold eyes locked onto Gareth. "Mine," Kieran growled. Gareth, to his credit, didn't beg. He knew it was too late. He shifted fully into his wolf form, a large, russet-colored beast, and lunged at Kieran's throat. Kieran caught the wolf by the throat with one hand. He lifted the 400-pound beast into the air, choking off his growl. Kieran squeezed. Gareth thrashed, his claws raking Kieran's arm. But the king didn't flinch. "You rejected her," Kieran said to the choking wolf. "You threw away a queen." He threw Gareth into the bars of the cell. The impact was tremendous. Gareth slid to the floor, shifted back into human form, unconscious and broken. Kieran ripped the door of Tessa's cell off. He fell to his knees in front of her, his hands shaking with adrenaline hovered over her face. "Did he hurt you?" Kieran asked, his voice desperate. "Tell me where to kill him." "I'm fine," Tessa wept, throwing her arms around his neck. "I'm fine. Just get me out of here." Kieran buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent. "I will burn this place to the ground." "No," Tessa pulled back. She looked at the open door. "We have to finish this. We have to stop Roderick." "We?" Kieran looked at her. "Yes, we." Tessa stood up. She felt strange. The fear was gone. In its place was a heat, a humming energy in her blood that she had never felt before. Being near Kieran, feeling his power, It was unlocking something in her. "Give me a weapon," Tessa said. Kieran reached down and pulled a jagged piece of iron bar from the debris of the door. He handed it to her. "Stay behind me," he ordered. "Beside you," Tessa corrected. Kieran paused. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the steel in her eyes. He nodded once. "Beside me." The courtyard of the Ironwood estate was a war zone. News of the king's escape had spread, but so had something else. While Tessa and Kieran were fighting their way out of the dungeon, the upload from the radio station had finished. Every alpha in the kingdom had received the file, the Voss dossier. It contained bank transfers, emails, and video evidence of Roderick's treason. It proved he was selling pack lands to mining corporations and planning to reinstate the brutal culling laws. As Kieran and Tessa burst out of the pack house doors and onto the snowy lawn, they weren't met with a united enemy. They were met with a civil war. Half of the Ironwood wolves had turned on the other half. The younger wolves, who had grown up under Kieran's peaceful reign, were fighting the older traditionalists, loyal to Roderick. "Traitors!" Roderick was screaming from the balcony, firing a pistol into the crowd. "Obey your alpha! You are no alpha!" a young wolf shouted, tackling a loyalist guard. Kieran stepped into the moonlight. The snow around him seemed to melt from the sheer heat of his aura. "Roderick!" Kieran bellowed. The fighting stopped. All eyes turned to the king. He stood there, shirtless, bloody, with the rejected Omega at his side. Roderick looked down from the balcony. "You refuse to die, boy." "Come down," Kieran challenged. "Challenge me. Or are you a coward who hides behind hired guns?" Roderick sneered. He vaulted over the railing, landing heavily in the snow. He was an older wolf, but massive. He shifted instantly into a gray, scarred beast, easily as large as Kieran. Kieran shifted too. The black wolf returned, larger and darker than the night itself. The two titans collided in the center of the courtyard. The sound was deafening. Jaws snapped, fur flew, and the ground shook. It was a dance of pure violence. Roderick was experienced, fighting, dirty, going for the eyes and the groin. But Kieran was fueled by a rage that Roderick couldn't comprehend. Meanwhile, Tessa was fighting for her life. Riker, the mercenary commander, had survived the radio station. He emerged from the chaos, a combat knife in his hand. "You caused a lot of trouble, girl," Riker grunted, slashing at her. Tessa ducked, swinging her iron bar. It connected with Riker's wrist, but he was wearing tactical armor. He laughed, kicking her in the stomach. Tessa fell back into the snow, gasping. Riker stood over her. "End of the line." He raised the knife. Tessa looked at Kieran, who was locked in a death grip with Roderick. He couldn't help her. She was on her own. "No, not on my own." Deep inside Tessa, the dormant spark flared. The presence of her true mate, the danger, the adrenaline, it finally broke the dam. Tessa screamed. Her bones cracked. Her vision shifted. She didn't shift into a wolf. That took time. She didn't have. Instead, she entered the partial state, a rare ancient form where the human body takes on the attributes of the wolf without the full transformation. Her nails lengthened into razor-sharp talons. Her teeth sharpened, and her eyes turned a blinding, luminous white, the mark of a spirit wolf. Riker hesitated, confused. Tessa moved. She was faster than Riker, faster than thought. She knocked the knife from his hand and slashed his chest with her claws. The armor tore like paper. Riker stumbled back, shock on his face. "What are you?" "I am the Queen," Tessa snarled. She spin-kicked him, sending him crashing into a stone pillar. He didn't get up. Across the yard, the alpha battle was ending. Kieran had taken a nasty bite to the shoulder, but he had pinned Roderick. The gray wolf was thrashing, but Kieran's jaws were clamped around his neck. Kieran looked at Tessa. He saw her standing over Riker, her eyes glowing white. Pride surged through the bond. Kieran tightened his grip. There was a wet snap. Roderick went limp. Kieran released him and threw his head back, letting out a howl of victory. Every wolf in the courtyard dropped to their knees. The loyalists, the rebels, the wounded, they all lowered their heads, baring their necks in submission. The king had returned. Kieran shifted back to human form. He didn't care about his nudity or the cold. He walked straight to Tessa. The white glow faded from her eyes, leaving her exhausted, swaying on her feet. Kieran caught her before she hit the snow. He lifted her into his arms, holding her against his chest. "Is it over?" she whispered. "The war is over," Kieran said, kissing her forehead. "But our reign is just beginning." Just then, the sound of heavy rotors filled the air. Floodlights swept the courtyard. Military helicopters bearing the royal crest descended. General Voss had arrived. Troops poured out, securing the perimeter, handcuffing the surviving traitors. An older man in a dress uniform ran toward them. "Your Majesty," Voss gasped, looking at the carnage. "We received the files. We came as fast as we could." "You're late, Voss," Kieran said dryly. "And the girl?" Voss asked, looking at Tessa with suspicion. "Who is this civilian?" Kieran looked down at Tessa, who was half asleep in his arms. "This is not a civilian, General," Kieran announced, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "This is my mate, and your future queen. Show some respect." Voss's eyes widened. He snapped a sharp salute. "Yes, Your Majesty." Kieran turned and carried Tessa toward the waiting helicopter. "Let's go home, Tessa," he whispered. "I don't have a home," she mumbled. "I blew it up." Kieran smiled a genuine, warm smile. "Then we'll build a new one." 3 months later. The royal palace in the capital of Valoria was a far cry from the logging cabin in Montana. It was all marble floors, velvet drapes, and chandeliers that cost more than small countries. Tessa hated it. She stood on the balcony of the royal suite, looking out over the city lights. She was wearing a silk gown that felt like a costume. It had been a whirlwind. The trials of the traitors, the purging of the corruption in the council, the media frenzy, the Cinderella wolf, they called her, the savior in flannel. She sighed. "You're thinking about running again." Tessa didn't turn. She knew the sound of those footsteps. Kieran walked out onto the balcony. He looked different now, clean-shaven, wearing a tailored suit, the weight of the crown visible on his shoulders. But his eyes were the same. "I'm not thinking about running," Tessa said. "I'm thinking about belonging." Kieran stood beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back. "You belong here." "Do I?" Tessa asked. "Kieran, look at me. I'm a logger. I skin beavers. I don't know which fork to use for the salad." The court whispers. "They say I'm not." "Traditional. Good," Kieran said. "Tradition is what tried to kill us." He turned her to face him. "Tessa, before you, I was a tyrant. I was cold. I ruled with fear because I didn't think I had anything to lose. You saved me, not just from the river. You saved my soul." "That's a lot of pressure," Tessa joked weakly. "I have something for you." Kieran reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Tessa held her breath. "If that's a ring, I might panic." "It's not a ring," Kieran smiled. He opened it. Inside lay a collar, but not a collar of servitude. It was a delicate choker made of white gold and diamonds, with a single pendant, a piece of jagged obsidian wrapped in silver wire. "I went back to the river," Kieran said softly. "I found the rock where you dragged me out. I had a jeweler cut this from it." Tessa touched the stone. It was cool and smooth. "In the old laws," Kieran explained, "a collar meant ownership. But I'm rewriting the laws. For us, this is a symbol of partnership. It represents the rock we started on, the bottom." He stepped behind her. "May I?" Tessa lifted her hair. Kieran clasped the necklace around her throat. It felt heavy, grounding. "Tessa O'Malley," Kieran whispered into her ear. "Will you stand beside me?" Not behind me, beside me, as my equal, as my wolf. Tessa turned around. She looked at the man who had once been a broken monster on her floor. She saw the love in his eyes fierce, unyielding, and absolute. "Yes," she said. Kieran didn't hesitate. He kissed her, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was a promise. The coronation day, the grand hall was packed. Thousands of wolves from every pack in the continent were watching. Cameras broadcasted the event to millions. Kieran sat on the obsidian throne. Beside him, a new throne had been built, smaller, but set at the exact same height. The high priest raised the crown, a delicate circlet of white gold. "Do you, Tessa, accept the burden of this pack? Do you vow to protect the weak, hunt the wicked, and lead with honor?" Tessa looked at the crowd. She saw General Voss nodding respectfully. She saw the faces of the young wolves who looked at her with hope. She looked at Kieran, who was watching her with pride. "I do," Tessa said clearly. The priest placed the crown on her head. "Then I present to you," the priest announced, "Queen Tessa, the White Wolf of the North." The crowd erupted. The howl that went up was deafening, a collective song of acceptance and joy. Kieran stood and took her hand. "Ready? Ready?" Tessa smiled. As they walked down the aisle, hand in hand, Tessa placed a hand on her stomach. She hadn't told him yet. She was waiting for the right moment. But the little spark of life growing inside her, a mix of the king's power and her own resilient spirit, fluttered. The dynasty was secure. The winter was over. And for the rejected Omega who dragged a wolf from the river, life was just beginning. And that is the story of Tessa and Kieran. From a frozen riverbank to the throne of a kingdom, they proved that true power isn't about bloodlines or titles. It's about the courage to save someone when everyone else has walked away. Gareth and the traitors got exactly what they deserved, and Tessa got the fairy tale she never asked for but totally earned. But wait, did you catch that final hint? Tessa is pregnant with the heir. What kind of power do you think a child of the Alpha King and a spirit wolf would have? Let me know your theories in the comments below. I hope you loved this journey. Writing this story was an emotional roller coaster. If you want more stories like this, maybe a spin-off about their child, or a story about General Voss finding love, please smash that like button. Share this video with your pack and subscribe. Until next time, stay wild!